Hello and welcome. Tonight, we travel back in time to the ancient world of Egypt, not to the pyramids, nor the conquests of great kings, but to something quieter, gentler, slower, comma. This is the story of Cleopatra, not as the world remembers her in legend, but as she might have truly lived, a ruler of calm intelligence, of careful thought, of deliberate grace. So, find a comfortable place. Let the sound of my voice guide you through the still halls of Alexandria. And as we drift through history together, remember, this is not a story of war or passion, but of patience, of composure, and of quiet power. Cleopatra VII Philopator was born in 69 BCE in the vibrant city of Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria was not only the capital of Ptolemaic Egypt, but also a bustling center of culture, learning, and trade, founded by Alexander the Great decades earlier. It housed the legendary library of Alexandria and a lighthouse that was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world for a young girl in a royal family. This city offered a life of quiet luxury, intellectual stimulation, and careful preparation for the responsibilities that awaited her. Cleopatra's family, the Ptolemies, were of Macedonian Greek descent, a lineage that traced back to one of Alexander's generals, Ptolemy I Soter. Despite ruling over an Egyptian populace, the Ptolemies maintained their Hellenistic identity, speaking Greek at court and preserving Greek customs. Cleopatra, however, would distinguish herself from her ancestors by learning the Egyptian language, rare skill among her family, and familiarizing herself with Egyptian culture and religion. She was said to speak at least 7 languages, a remarkable feat that, while quietly impressive, would become a defining aspect of her rule. Her early education was thorough and structured. Tutors instructed her in mathematics, philosophy, literature, astronomy, and governance. She likely spent hours poring over texts in Greek, listening to lessons on the natural world, and memorizing the histories of both her ancestors and the Egyptians she would one day govern. Life in the palace was orderly and predictable. Daily routines involved attending court meetings, learning protocols, and observing her father, Ptolemy XII, as he navigated the complicated political landscape of Egypt and Rome. Palace life, though luxurious, was also restrictive. Cleopatra's days were spent largely indoors, moving from one lesson to another, or sitting in the shaded gardens of the royal residence, where the breeze from the nearby Mediterranean occasionally stirred the leaves of date palms and olive trees. Servants quietly attended to her needs, ensuring that her environment was comfortable and her life uninterrupted by mundane concerns. Yet, within these walls of comfort, there were subtle pressures. She was not merely a princess. She was a future ruler, and she had to prepare for the intricate politics of her family and the court. Cleopatra's family was complicated. She had several siblings, some older, some younger, and most of whom would later become her political rivals. Sibling marriages were common in the Ptolemaic dynasty, intended to preserve royal bloodlines and consolidate power. These arrangements meant that Cleopatra, from a young age, had to understand the delicate balance between loyalty, ambition, and self-preservation. Her father's reign was marked by both domestic unrest and external threats. Ptolemy XII had to maintain Egypt's independence in the shadow of an expanding Roman Republic, which had its eyes on Egypt's wealth and strategic position. Cleopatra observed all of this with a quiet attentiveness that would later define her diplomatic style. Despite the political tension surrounding her family, Cleopatra's personal life in these years was relatively quiet. She engaged in activities typical of a princess, walking through palace gardens, listening to stories from court historians, and studying texts that ranged from scientific treatises to philosophical dialogues. She may have played with small animals, examined specimens of plants, or even watched artisans at work in the palace workshops. The daily rhythm of her life, punctuated by lessons and gentle walks, was not chaotic or dramatic. It was steady, predictable, and, in many ways, ordinary for someone of her status. Nevertheless, Cleopatra's intelligence and curiosity set her apart from her siblings. She showed an early interest in the governance of Egypt, asking questions about taxation, irrigation, and the administration of cities. She was curious about religion, too, learning about the Egyptian gods and participating in temple rituals. Though often as a careful observer, her tutors would have noted her attentiveness and perhaps been impressed by her capacity to absorb knowledge quietly, without the need for grand gestures or dramatic displays. By the age of 18, Cleopatra was ready to assume a more active role in Egypt's political life. The death of her father, Ptolemy XII, brought her and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, to the throne as co-ruler. This was a time of both opportunity and danger. Cleopatra now had to navigate not just the internal rivalries of her family, but also the complex web of relationships with Roman leaders, neighboring kingdoms, and Egyptian elites. Though her life had been quiet and orderly until now, the responsibilities she was about to assume would require her intelligence, charm, and careful calculation. Interestingly, even in the midst of preparation for rulership, Cleopatra's life retained elements of tranquility. She continued to study, walked in gardens, and maintained a routine that balanced learning and leisure, while some of her contemporaries might have been swept up in the chaos of court. Intrigue from a younger age, Cleopatra's early years allowed her to cultivate patience, observation, and an understanding of human behavior. These skills would become invaluable as she later faced political crises, romantic entanglements, and wars that threatened her kingdom. In retrospect, Cleopatra's early life appears uneventful, perhaps even mundane, especially when compared to the dramatic events that would later define her reign. Yet, it was precisely this quiet, structured upbringing that allowed her to develop the skills necessary to govern effectively. The time spent studying languages, understanding culture, observing politics, and living in a controlled environment prepared her to engage with the complex realities of power. Thus, the quiet life of young Cleopatra was far from insignificant. It was a period of learning, reflection, and preparation. Each day, each lesson, each carefully observed ritual in the palace contributed to the formation of a ruler who would later be remembered, not just for her beauty or her liaisons with Roman leaders, but for her intelligence, diplomacy, and ability to navigate the turbulent waters of politics with subtlety and grace. Her early life in Alexandria may have been slow and unremarkable to outsiders. But to Cleopatra, it was a foundation one that would allow her to face the challenges ahead with wisdom, poise, and quiet determination. Cleopatra VII ascended to the throne of Egypt in 51 BC. Following the death of her father, Ptolemy XII, she was only 18 years old, an age when many of her contemporaries might have been preoccupied with marriage, prospects, or leisurely pursuits. Yet she now faced the immense responsibility of ruling the kingdom at a time of internal and external uncertainty. Her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, was officially her co-ruler, a requirement of Ptolemaic custom, though he was likely no older than 10 or 11 at the time. This arrangement, while traditional, introduced a subtle tension. Cleopatra was intellectually and emotionally prepared to govern, whereas her brother was dependent on advisors who often had their own agendas. The Ptolemaic court was an environment of constant intrigue. Advisors, generals, priests, and family members all vied for influence, each hoping to guide or manipulate the young rulers for their own advantage. Cleopatra had to learn quickly how to navigate this delicate landscape. Her education had provided her with knowledge of politics, languages, and diplomacy, but the practical application of these lessons was now essential. She observed the daily operations of the court, attended meetings where decisions about taxation, trade, and military affairs were discussed, and quietly assessed which individuals could be trusted. Her early reign was thus characterized by observation, cautious experimentation, and subtle negotiation. One of the first challenges Cleopatra faced was the regency of her brother. While Ptolemaic custom dictated joint rule, real power often lay in the hands of the more dominant sibling or their advisors. Cleopatra's co-rulers and their entourage were influenced by factional politics. Some advisors favored Ptolemy XIII as the official ruler due to his male status, while others recognized Cleopatra's capability and intelligence. These dynamics created a slow-moving, tense environment where every decision required careful consideration. Cleopatra learned to speak little when necessary, to act cautiously, and to present herself as a figure of dignity and authority without provoking open conflict. Beyond internal politics, Cleopatra also had to contend with Egypt's relations with Rome by the mid-1st century BCE. Rome had become the dominant power in the Mediterranean, and Egypt's wealth and strategic location made it both valuable and vulnerable. Ptolemy XII had previously secured Egypt's independence through payments and alliances with Rome, but these arrangements were fragile. Cleopatra, aware of the geopolitical reality, understood that her survival and the prosperity of Egypt depended on careful diplomacy. She began to study the habits, personalities, and preferences of Roman officials, preparing herself to engage with them when necessary. Despite these pressures, Cleopatra maintained a daily routine that balanced governance with quiet reflection. Her mornings often began with audiences in the palace, where she received reports from advisors and local officials. She listened attentively, asked questions, and noted inconsistencies or potential problems. Afternoons might be spent in private study or walking in the shaded gardens of Alexandria, observing nature or practicing public speaking. These quiet moments allowed her to process information, reflect on strategy, and maintain a sense of calm amidst political turbulence. However, tensions within the court soon escalated. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, wary of Cleopatra's growing influence and intelligence, began to plot against her. They spread rumors, manipulated information, and sought to isolate her from key allies. Cleopatra responded with patience, caution, and subtlety. She cultivated loyalty among officials and military commanders, demonstrating competence and discretion. Rather than confronting her brother openly, she allowed events to unfold while quietly strengthening her position. This slow, deliberate approach exemplified her ability to navigate complex political waters without resorting to overt aggression. During this period, Cleopatra also began to develop her public persona as queen. She recognized the importance of appearances and symbolism in maintaining authority. Ceremonies, temple visits, and public addresses were opportunities to project stability, intelligence, and divine favor. Her knowledge of Egyptian religious practices allowed her to connect with the local population. Despite her Greek heritage, this connection was quiet but significant, as it helped legitimize her rule in the eyes of both the people and the priesthood. The quiet life of governance, however, was punctuated by moments of crisis. Rebellions, economic pressures, and threats from ambitious court factions required careful management. Cleopatra often faced decisions where the outcomes were uncertain, and the stakes were high. Yet, even in these moments, she preferred careful calculation over impulsive action. Her approach was methodical: gather information, consult trusted advisors, anticipate consequences, and then act. This measured style would later become a hallmark of her leadership. By 48 BCE, the slow tensions within the court reached a tipping point. Ptolemy XIII's advisors effectively forced Cleopatra to flee Alexandria, removing her from power temporarily. The young queen spent time in relative obscurity, maintaining her connections, observing political developments, and planning her return. Even in exile, her days were structured, filled with reading, correspondence, and quiet strategy. She cultivated alliances and awaited the opportune moment to regain her throne. The calm patience with which she approached this period reflected the years of preparation and observation that had defined her early life. Cleopatra's early reign illustrates the paradox of her quiet life, outwardly serene, inwardly intense. She faced constant political challenges, navigated family rivalries, and managed the delicate balance of power between Egypt and Rome. Yet, she accomplished this with subtlety, patience, and careful calculation. Her actions were rarely dramatic in public. Instead, she relied on observation, intelligence, and strategic relationships to maintain and eventually restore her authority. In summary, Cleopatra's early years as queen were defined by observation, learning, and cautious engagement with power. The Ptolemaic court was a complex and often perilous environment, requiring her to develop skills in diplomacy, strategy, and human understanding. The quiet routines of her daily life attending audiences, walking in gardens, Studying political reports provided the foundation for her later achievements. These years, though lacking the sensationalism often associated with Cleopatra's life, were essential in shaping a ruler, capable of navigating one of the most turbulent periods in Egypt's history by carefully balancing patience and action, observation and engagement. Cleopatra demonstrated that the exercise of power need not always be loud or aggressive. In the quiet moments of her early reign, she laid the groundwork for a leadership style that would become legendary, not because of dramatic gestures, but because of her measured, intelligent, and persistent approach to governance. By 48 BCE, the political landscape of Egypt had become increasingly unstable. Cleopatra VII, despite her intelligence and cautious planning, had been forced into temporary exile by the faction led by her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, and his advisors. While away from Alexandria, Cleopatra remained engaged with the affairs of her kingdom through discreet channels. She corresponded with loyal officials, gathered intelligence on court politics, and carefully assessed the balance of power within Egypt. Her days were structured, quiet, and reflective, focused on observation and strategic planning rather than dramatic action. Meanwhile, in the wider Mediterranean world, Julius Caesar, the renowned Roman general and statesman, was consolidating power after a series of military campaigns that had culminated in the defeat of his rival, Pompey the Great. Following Pompey's loss, he fled to Egypt, seeking refuge and hoping to find allies. Egypt, a wealthy kingdom with strategic importance, was both an opportunity and a challenge. Caesar arrived in Alexandria in pursuit of Pompey, unaware that the young Egyptian queen had been ousted from power. Cleopatra, understanding the significance of Caesar's presence, recognized a rare opportunity to regain her throne. Her advisors encouraged caution, and she herself meticulously planned her approach. It is said that she arranged to meet Caesar in secrecy, famously having herself smuggled into the royal palace, rolled in a carpet or a bedding sack. According to some accounts, while this story has captured the imagination of later generations, the underlying reality reflects a careful, calculated strategy. Cleopatra sought to present herself directly to Caesar in a controlled manner, minimizing risk and maximizing the impact of her appearance. Upon meeting Caesar, Cleopatra demonstrated intelligence, charm, and poise. The young queen spoke several languages, likely including Greek and Egyptian, allowing her to communicate effectively without the need for an interpreter. She conveyed knowledge of Egypt's political situation, her legitimacy as ruler, and her plans for the stability of the kingdom. Caesar, a shrewd and pragmatic leader, recognized the potential of aligning with Cleopatra. He observed not just her appearance, but her demeanor, her grasp of political nuance, and her capacity to govern effectively. Their interaction was initially cautious, with both parties evaluating the potential benefits of cooperation. Following this initial meeting, Cleopatra worked to consolidate support within Alexandria. She appealed to loyal officials, military commanders, and influential citizens, presenting herself as the rightful ruler whose return would ensure stability and prosperity. Caesar, observing these developments, provided his endorsement, thereby lending the authority of Rome to her cause. The quiet, deliberate planning and execution of this strategy exemplify Cleopatra's approach, patient, calculated, and deeply strategic. The conflict with Ptolemy XIII escalated into a civil struggle known as the Alexandrian War. The young king and his advisors resisted Cleopatra's return, leading to military engagements within the city. Caesar, despite being focused on broader Roman political concerns, commanded forces to support Cleopatra's claim. The battles were tense but relatively contained, taking place in urban districts, palace complexes, and along the Nile. Cleopatra, though not a battlefield commander, remained actively involved in coordinating her supporters, ensuring that her communications and alliances were effective. Eventually, Ptolemy XIII was defeated, though the circumstances of his demise are debated among historians. Cleopatra, with the support of Caesar, was restored to the throne as this time alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIV. The resolution of this conflict was not marked by grand celebrations, but rather by a careful restoration of governance, reestablishment of administrative routines, and quiet consolidation of power. Cleopatra's approach continued to emphasize stability, diplomacy, and the reinforcement of her legitimacy, rather than ostentation or reckless displays of triumph. Following her restoration, Cleopatra spent time with Caesar in Alexandria, while later narratives have dramatized their relationship as romantic and scandalous. The historical record suggests that their interactions were heavily influenced by political necessity. Cleopatra recognized that an alliance with Rome, and specifically with Caesar, provided protection against internal and external threats. Caesar, for his part, understood that supporting Cleopatra ensured Egypt's wealth and strategic alignment with Rome. Their collaboration was thus rooted in mutual interest, calculated advantage, and pragmatic governance. During this period, Cleopatra also focused on the internal administration of Egypt. She oversaw taxation policies, trade regulations, and resource management. The Nile's annual flooding required careful monitoring, as agricultural production depended on timely irrigation and flood management. Cleopatra's attention to these details, though unglamorous, was essential to the kingdom's economic stability. Her daily routine likely included reviewing reports, consulting with advisors, and making incremental decisions that cumulatively shaped the prosperity of Egypt. Cleopatra's quiet life during this time, despite the proximity of Caesar and the recent conflict, reflected her consistent approach to power, measured, strategic, and rooted in observation. She did not rely on spectacle to assert authority. Instead, she used intelligence, personal diplomacy, and a thorough understanding of political dynamics. Even her interactions with Caesar, often highlighted in dramatic can be viewed through this lens: careful negotiation, assessment of opportunity, and consolidation of her position. Ultimately, Cleopatra's collaboration with Caesar solidified her reign and established her as a ruler, capable of navigating the complex interplay of internal politics and foreign diplomacy. The young queen's early experiences, quiet observation, rigorous education, and cautious engagement culminated in this pivotal moment. Through patience, strategic thinking, and a consistent emphasis on stability, Cleopatra reclaimed her throne, strengthened her authority, and positioned herself for the further challenges that lay ahead. In summary, Chapter 3 illustrates how Cleopatra's quiet, methodical approach to governance enabled her to turn a precarious exile into an opportunity for political restoration. Her alliance with Julius Caesar, often sensationalized in later stories, was rooted in practical strategy and mutual interest. Cleopatra's ability to assess, plan, and act with precision exemplifies the subtler dimensions of leadership, where calm calculation and patient observation are often more effective than impulsive or ostentatious measures. The quiet life of Cleopatra, though punctuated by political crises, remained centered on careful decision-making, the cultivation of alliances, and the gradual consolidation of power. These qualities, developed during her early life and early reign, would continue to define her rule, laying the foundation for her enduring legacy as one of history's most intelligent and strategically minded queens. After the Alexandrian War and her restoration to the throne of Egypt, Cleopatra's political life entered a new phase, defined by her connection to Julius Caesar. Although she had been reinstated as co-ruler alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, her alliance with Caesar extended her influence far beyond Egypt's borders. Rome, as the preeminent power in the Mediterranean, was both an opportunity and a potential threat. Cleopatra's strategy involved navigating this foreign environment carefully, attending to the subtleties of Roman politics, and maintaining her authority at home. Cleopatra spent part of the next few months in Alexandria consolidating her rule. She focused on stabilizing administrative structures, ensuring that taxation and resource management proceeded smoothly, and reinforcing her legitimacy among the Egyptian population. These responsibilities were both mundane and essential, forming the quieter side of her reign. In her palace, she would review reports on grain shipments, agricultural yields, and the distribution of funds to temple officials. Each decision was a small but necessary step towards strengthening her position. The rhythm of her daily life remained steady. Audiences in the morning, consultation with advisors in the afternoon, and periods of reflection and study in the evening. During this time, Caesar invited Cleopatra to visit Rome, a request both delicate and politically significant. Traveling to Rome presented opportunities to solidify her relationship with Caesar, demonstrate her sophistication to Roman elites, and cultivate favorable impressions of Egypt. At the same time, it required careful planning and restraint. The journey itself was long, involving travel by ship along the Mediterranean, and she had to consider her personal safety, the security of her entourage, and the perceptions of Roman citizens and senators. Cleopatra's time in Rome was marked by a combination of public visibility and private strategy. She participated in ceremonial events, attended banquets, and met with influential senators and advisors. She observed the workings of the Roman political system, debates in the Senate, the administration of provinces, and the rituals that reinforced the social hierarchy. Cleopatra's approach was measured. She spoke when appropriate, listened attentively, and evaluated the motivations and personalities of those around her, while dramatic accounts later emphasized her beauty and charm. The quieter reality likely involved careful observation, prudent conversation, and subtle negotiation. One of the challenges Cleopatra faced in Rome was balancing her presence with the need to maintain political discretion. Romans were wary of foreign influence, and her status as a queen from a wealthy, independent kingdom attracted both curiosity and suspicion. Cleopatra's comportment, therefore, had to project dignity, intelligence, and respect for Roman norms. She relied on her knowledge of languages, etiquette, and diplomacy to navigate these interactions without overtly challenging Roman authority. Her quiet, thoughtful demeanor allowed her to be noticed and remembered, without causing offense or attracting undue hostility. Even in the midst of these high-profile activities, Cleopatra's daily life retained a sense of structure and order. She spent hours reviewing correspondence from Alexandria, receiving reports on economic and military matters, and consulting with trusted advisors regarding the ongoing administration of Egypt. Her personal routine likely included private reflection, reading, and planning, all conducted in a measured, unhurried manner. These quieter moments were essential, as they allowed her to process information, consider her options, and maintain a sense of stability amid a foreign environment that could easily become overwhelming. Cleopatra's interactions with Caesar in Rome also involved subtle political maneuvering. While their personal relationship has been romanticized in literature and art, its practical significance lay in the consolidation of alliances. Caesar's endorsement provided her with protection and legitimacy, while Cleopatra's presence reinforced Caesar's influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. Together, they engaged in discussions regarding trade, taxation, and diplomatic relations, often conducted in private settings where decisions could be deliberated without public scrutiny. These moments, though quiet and unassuming, were critical to the governance of Egypt and the broader strategic interests of both leaders. During her stay, Cleopatra had to navigate not only political expectations, but also cultural differences. Roman customs, social norms, and legal frameworks differed significantly from those of Alexandria. She observed and adapted, learning how to present herself effectively in public, how to negotiate with officials, and how to maintain her authority without overstepping perceived boundaries. Her careful observation and restraint exemplify a leadership style rooted in patience, intelligence, and strategic foresight. After several months in Rome, Cleopatra returned to Egypt. Her sojourn, though relatively quiet and disciplined, had lasting effects. She had gained insights into Roman politics, strengthened her alliance with Caesar, and demonstrated her capacity to operate successfully in a foreign environment. These experiences informed her subsequent governance, influencing her approach to both domestic and international affairs. In Alexandria, Cleopatra resumed her routine with renewed focus. She monitored the administration of her kingdom, ensured the stability of her quarrel with Ptolemy XIV, and continued her practice of careful observation and strategic decision-making. Her days were filled with the minutiae of governance, reviewing reports, meeting with advisors, and overseeing economic and religious activities. Each action, though small and often unremarkable to outsiders, contributed to the gradual strengthening of her authority, and the enduring stability of her reign. Chapter 4 illustrates how Cleopatra's quiet, methodical approach to leadership extended beyond Egypt. Her time in Rome demonstrates the effectiveness of patience, careful observation, and strategic engagement in navigating complex political environments by maintaining a steady, disciplined routine and balancing public visibility with private planning. Cleopatra reinforced her position as a capable and intelligent ruler. In summary, Cleopatra's life in Rome was not characterized by dramatic events or sensational displays of power. Instead, it was marked by measured diplomacy, careful observation, and the incremental consolidation of influence. Her quiet approach allowed her to adapt to a foreign environment, strengthen critical alliances, and return to Egypt with enhanced authority. These qualities, patience, strategic foresight, and attention to detail, continued to define her reign and contribute to her enduring legacy as one of history's most intelligent and deliberate leaders. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE marked a pivotal turning point for Cleopatra VII and the landscape of the Mediterranean. Caesar's death left a power vacuum in Rome and a period of uncertainty for Egypt. Cleopatra, who had relied on her alliance with Caesar to secure her position, now faced the delicate task of maintaining Egypt's stability amid shifting allegiances and the emergence of new Roman leaders. Cleopatra's immediate concern following Caesar's assassination was the succession and legitimacy of her co-rule with Ptolemy XIV. Ptolemy XIV, though nominally king alongside Cleopatra, was young and politically inexperienced. Cleopatra continued to exercise the practical authority of rulership, managing the administration of the kingdom, overseeing taxation, and ensuring the smooth operation of the Nile's agricultural systems. Her daily life remained methodical. She reviewed reports, consulted with advisors, and maintained a structured routine, reflecting the quiet diligence that had defined her reign since her early years. Meanwhile, Rome was entering a period of political realignment. The power struggle between Octavian, Mark Antony, and other Roman leaders created both risks and opportunities for Cleopatra. She understood that her engagement with the emerging Roman factions could determine Egypt's security and prosperity. Her approach was characterized by careful observation and cautious diplomacy. She sent envoys, maintained correspondence, and assessed which alliances would best serve Egypt's long-term interests. Mark Antony, a member of the Second Triumvirate, emerged as a central figure in this evolving political landscape. Cleopatra recognized the potential benefits of an alliance with Antony, whose military and political influence offered both protection and strategic advantage. She carefully orchestrated their initial meeting in 41 BCE, presenting herself in a manner that demonstrated intelligence, composure, and the capacity for leadership. Reports indicate that Cleopatra arrived in Alexandria in a ceremonious yet controlled manner, projecting authority while managing the optics of her presence. The alliance between Cleopatra and Antony was mutually advantageous. Antony seeking resources and strategic alliances for his campaigns, found in Cleopatra a partner capable of supplying Egypt's wealth and military support. Cleopatra, in turn, leveraged Antony's influence to consolidate her rule, defend Egypt's borders, and maintain domestic stability. Their relationship, while later romanticized, was rooted in pragmatic politics, structured diplomacy, and careful calculation. During this period, Cleopatra's daily life involved extensive management of political, economic, and military affairs. She coordinated the distribution of grain, monitored the performance of regional governors, and ensured the enforcement of laws and regulations. Her attention to these details, though unremarkable to observers outside the palace, was critical to maintaining Egypt's prosperity and the stability of her reign. She maintained a disciplined routine, balancing private reflection, study, and strategic planning with public duties and ceremonial obligations. Cleopatra also focused on cultivating loyalty among Egyptian elites and citizens. She reinforced religious practices, participated in temple rituals, and projected an image of continuity and stability. These actions, though seemingly routine, were essential in a period marked by uncertainty. By maintaining the appearance of calm authority and competence, Cleopatra reassured her subjects and strengthened her legitimacy. The political collaboration with Mark Antony extended beyond mere alliances. It involved careful negotiation and coordination of military resources, trade agreements, and diplomatic strategies. Cleopatra's intelligence and meticulous attention to detail enabled her to navigate these complex interactions with caution and foresight. Her decisions were deliberate, measured, and aimed at securing Egypt's position without provoking unnecessary conflict. While the alliance with Antony offered significant advantages, it also required careful management of perception. Romans, wary of foreign influence and potential threats to their authority, scrutinized Cleopatra's actions and her interactions with Antony. Cleopatra, aware of this scrutiny, employed subtlety and discretion, presenting herself in public with dignity and restraint. Her ability to maintain a quiet, controlled presence in high-stakes political environments underscored her strategic acumen and reinforced her reputation as a capable and intelligent ruler. Throughout this period, Cleopatra's personal routine reflected her enduring commitment to structured governance. Her days were punctuated by administrative meetings, correspondence with advisors, and careful monitoring of both domestic and international developments. Even amid political maneuvering and the pressures of a she maintained periods of private reflection, strategic planning, and study. These quieter aspects of her life, though lacking in drama, were essential to her ability to respond effectively to emerging challenges. The rise of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's subsequent alliance with him also influenced the broader geopolitical dynamics of the Mediterranean. Egypt's resources and strategic position became pivotal in the conflicts among Roman factions. Cleopatra's involvement, conducted with prudence and foresight, allowed her to secure Egypt's interests while avoiding entanglement in unnecessary confrontations. Her ability to balance engagement with caution exemplifies the quiet, calculated approach that characterized her leadership throughout her reign. Cleopatra's quiet life during the rise of Mark Antony was not marked by impulsive or ostentatious actions. Rather, It exemplified the disciplined, thoughtful, and strategic approach that allowed her to navigate one of the most volatile periods in her kingdom's history through careful observation, measured decision-making, and subtle diplomacy. She reinforced her position as Egypt's ruler and ensured the ongoing prosperity and stability of her realm. After years of political balance, quiet alliances, and careful diplomacy, Cleopatra's reign entered one of its most uncertain periods. The growing tensions between Mark Antony and Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted heir, slowly escalated into open conflict. For Cleopatra, this was not simply a Roman struggle. It was a test of everything she had built: her authority, her country's independence, and her own legacy. By 32 BC, the fragile peace that had held between Antony and Octavian was disintegrating. The political division of the Roman world, which had been maintained through uneasy cooperation, began to collapse. Rumors circulated through Alexandria and Rome alike. Messengers carried quiet whispers of betrayal, shifting loyalties, and inevitable war. Cleopatra observed all of this with her characteristic calm. She had seen power rise and fall before. She knew that Rome's leaders were unpredictable, ambitious, proud, and easily provoked. In her palace by the sea, she read reports by candlelight: grain exports, naval preparations, diplomatic letters, everything passed through her hands. She discussed each detail with her advisors. Her tone measured, her questions precise. Her alliance with Mark Antony had grown both personal and political. They had children together, the twins Alexander, Helios, and Cleopatra Selene, and later Ptolemy. But beyond the family ties, there was strategy. Antony needed Egypt's wealth and ships. Cleopatra needed his protection and influence to safeguard her kingdom. Their partnership was an intricate balance of affection, necessity, and power. In 31 BCE, the stage was set for one of the most consequential naval battles of the ancient world, the Battle of Actium. Antony and Cleopatra positioned their combined forces along the western coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, under the command of Agrippa, approached with quiet confidence. Both sides waited, prepared, and calculated. In Alexandria, life continued at its usual rhythm. Merchants traded along the harbor. Scholars in the library debated philosophy and astronomy. Farmers along the Nile tended to their crops. The Egyptian people, though aware of the tension, continued their daily routines. Cleopatra ensured that the administration functioned smoothly, even while preparing for war. Her orders were precise, her couriers tireless. For Cleopatra, this was not merely a battle fought on the sea. It was a test of control. Every morning, she reviewed supply reports, the number of ships provisioned, the availability of grain, the morale of soldiers. She met with her naval officers, many of them Greek, and reviewed tactical maps. Her leadership was steady, methodical, and grounded in experience. There was no panic in her demeanor, no impulsive decisions, only the quiet confidence of someone who understood that stability was built on patience. The fleet she provided for Antony was impressive. Egyptian shipwrights had crafted large vessels capable of carrying significant armament and personnel. They were slower than the Roman ships, but stronger, designed for endurance and defense. Cleopatra's role in financing and managing this naval force was crucial. She was not a passive ally. Her attention to logistical details kept the war effort alive far longer than it might have otherwise. When the battle finally began on September 2nd, 31 BC, it unfolded under a bright Greek sun. The sea shimmered, the air was heavy with tension. Cleopatra commanded her squadron from her flagship, a symbol of both authority and defiance. The wind shifted, orders were shouted. Roman triremes advanced in tight formation, while Antony's fleet tried to maneuver in the open water. For hours, the fighting continued. Oars splashed rhythmically, arrows cut through the air, and the smell of burning pitch drifted across the waves. Cleopatra watched from the deck, her expression unreadable. She understood that battles were rarely won by force alone. They were won by endurance, by timing, by the quiet precision of choosing when to act and when to retreat. As the tide turned against Antony's forces, Cleopatra made a decision calm, deliberate, and controversial. She signaled her ships to withdraw. Some historians interpret this as panic. Others see it as strategy. Her fleet, heavily provisioned and essential for survival, could not be risked in a losing battle. She sailed south toward safety, toward Egypt. Antony, upon seeing her departure, followed. Their retreat marked the end of the engagement and the beginning of the end of their political power. The aftermath of Actium was not immediate destruction, but a slow unraveling. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Alexandria. There, in the quiet halls of her palace, Cleopatra resumed her routines. She continued to meet with her advisors, review economic reports, and organize defenses. Though defeat loomed, she refused to let disorder take root. The palace atmosphere shifted. Once filled with optimism and political celebration, it became subdued. Courtiers spoke softly. Soldiers trained in silence. Cleopatra, maintaining composure, focused on practicalities, securing resources, fortifying positions, and planning contingencies. Each morning, she met with scribes and generals, ensuring that every detail of Egypt's defenses was attended to. She also turned her attention to diplomacy. Cleopatra sent messages to Octavian, testing the tone of possible negotiation. Her letters were composed with care, measured, respectful, and strategically vague. She understood that her survival and that of her children depended not on defiance but on intelligent restraint. In private, Cleopatra's life was still one of ritual and discipline. She rose early, observed religious ceremonies, and spent time with her children. Despite the political collapse around her, she preserved an atmosphere of routine, perhaps, as a way to maintain sanity in uncertain times. Evenings were spent quietly, reviewing documents, studying maps, listening to music, or speaking softly with Antony about possible outcomes. Antony, by contrast, struggled with despair. His confidence eroded under the weight of loss and betrayal. Cleopatra offered steadiness, calm words, small gestures of reassurance. Her strength lay not in military might, but in composure, the ability to stand still while everything else fell apart. As the months passed, Octavian's forces advanced toward Egypt. Cleopatra monitored their progress from her palace balcony. Watching the horizon, listening to reports brought by riders from the north, she prepared for every possibility: defense, surrender, escape. Her treasury was guarded, her ships repaired, her archives organized. Yet even as the end approached, there was quiet beauty in the rhythm of her days. The Nile continued to rise and fall. The sun set behind the western hills in shades of amber and violet. The sounds of daily life, footsteps on marble floors, the rustle of papyrus, the whisper of servants continued. It was as though Cleopatra, in her final years, found a strange peace in order. Even as empire dissolved around her, by the time Octavian entered Egypt in 30 BC, Cleopatra's fate was nearly sealed. She met his envoys with the same calm that had defined her reign. There were no outbursts, no displays of fear, only quiet dignity. She negotiated for the future of her children and the preservation of Egypt's culture, even knowing her own end was near. The Battle of Actium had ended more than a war. It had ended an era, the age of independent Egypt, the age of the Ptolemy, and the delicate balance between Greek and Egyptian power. But within that ending, Cleopatra's quiet perseverance stood as its own kind of victory. She had lived as she ruled, with structure, intellect, and measured resolve. Even defeat did not undo her sense of control. As the Roman Empire expanded over the ashes of her dynasty, her image thoughtful, composed, deliberate, endured. The quiet life of Cleopatra, even in its final chapters, was not one of surrender. It was one of patience, the stillness of someone who understood that power, in its truest form, was not loud or dramatic, but disciplined, enduring, and calm. By the summer of 30 BC, the city of Alexandria, once the crown jewel of the Mediterranean, stood on the edge of silence. Its white marble streets, its towering lighthouse, and its magnificent library all seemed to hold their breath. The hum of merchants in the harbor was quieter now. The laughter of scholars had faded. Word had spread across Egypt. Octavian was coming. Cleopatra knew this would happen. She had known it for months, perhaps even years. Empires moved slowly, but they moved inevitably. Rome, like the tide of the Nile, could not be stopped. She understood that her reign and the long dynasty of the Ptolemies had reached its twilight, and yet she continued to rule, not with armies, but with order. Each morning, Cleopatra's attendants woke her before dawn. She rose quietly, surrounded by the soft rustle of linen curtains. The first light of day spilled across the polished floors of her chamber. She washed her face with cool water, performed her small rituals to Isis, and then began her work. Even in defeat, Cleopatra maintained her discipline. Her scribes brought reports, movements of Roman legions, the conditions of the granaries, the loyalty of local governors. She read everything carefully. There was no panic in her demeanor, only quiet thoughtfulness. She made notes in the margins, instructed her ministers on responses, and gave precise directions on matters that might seem trivial: grain distribution, temple repairs, and the upkeep of the lighthouse. To the very end, she believed that order itself was a form of resistance. If Rome would take Egypt, it would not take her dignity. Outside the palace, Alexandria braced for siege. Roman banners were spotted in the distance. their scarlet cloths moving like slow flames across the horizon. Soldiers fortified the walls, citizens whispered prayers, and the harbor filled with the faint echo of hammering as the last ships were prepared for defense. Cleopatra moved through the halls of her palace in silence. She did not wear the golden crown of a pharaoh anymore, only a simple diadem. Her presence was calm, her steps unhurried. When she spoke to her advisers, her tone was measured, her words chosen with the same care she had once used to negotiate with Caesar and Mark Antony, meanwhile, was breaking. The defeat at Actium had left deep scars not only on his reputation but on his spirit. Once a commander of immense confidence, he now paced the marble floors with restless energy. His face, once proud, carried exhaustion. Cleopatra watched him with quiet empathy, offering neither blame nor false hope. In private, they spoke softly, about their children, about Rome, about what might come next. Antony spoke of honor, of death, of the futility of resistance. Cleopatra listened. Her silences were long and deliberate, not of agreement, but of reflection. She was already preparing for what he could not yet accept. In the weeks that followed, Octavian's legions advanced steadily. The Nile carried news before soldiers arrived. Cities surrendered without resistance. Alexandria's gates would not hold. One evening, as the city glowed in the fading light, Cleopatra stood on her balcony overlooking the harbor. The air smelled of salt and dust. Below her, the ships swayed quietly. She watched the horizon where the sea met the sky and thought of the years that had passed, the meetings in Rome, the grandeur of the Alexandrian court, the laughter of her children. It was not regret that filled her, but clarity. She understood that her life had been part of something larger, the last breath of a civilization that had begun with the pharaohs, flourished under the Greeks, and would now dissolve into Rome. When Octavian's army finally reached Alexandria, the city did not resist. The gates opened, and Roman soldiers entered with quiet efficiency. There was no chaos, only inevitability. Mark Antony, realizing that all was lost, took his own life. Ancient writers described the scene, with tragedy the once great general dying in Cleopatra's arms, his blood staining the marble floors. Whether the story unfolded exactly that way, no one truly knows. But Cleopatra's reaction was calm. She mourned him privately. There were no grand gestures, no weeping before her court. Just stillness, the kind of silence that holds both sorrow and understanding. After Antony's death, Cleopatra withdrew to her private chambers. She allowed few visitors. The palace grew quieter still. Servants moved like shadows. The sound of the fountain in the courtyard became the only constant. Octavian sent envoys to her men dressed in Roman armor, carrying offers and threats in equal measure. Cleopatra received them politely. Her posture was composed, her eyes unflinching. She negotiated for her children's safety, offering treasures, promises, and even herself as a supplicant. But she understood Rome. She knew mercy. There was always strategic, never sincere. In her final days, she maintained her routines. She still read reports. She still gave instructions to her scribes. She walked through the palace gardens at dusk, where papyrus reeds swayed and lotus flowers closed for the night. She touched the leaves of fig trees, smelled the river wind, and thought of her ancestors, of Ptolemy I, who had come from Macedon with Alexander the Great, and of the long line of rulers whose lives had intertwined Greek intellect with Egyptian ritual. She had been their last voice. On her final morning, Cleopatra dressed carefully. She wore a linen gown of pale white, adorned with only a few golden bracelets. Her attendants braided her hair into long coils. She requested a simple meal, fruit, bread, and honey, and shared it with her two closest servants, Iris and Charmian. No one recorded their conversation that morning, but it must have been calm. Cleopatra had made her decision. She would not walk in Octavian's triumph through the streets of Rome. She would not be displayed as a curiosity. As a foreign queen brought low, her dignity would remain her own. Accounts differ on how her life ended. Some say she arranged for a basket of figs to be brought to her chamber, concealing within it a small asp, a venomous Egyptian snake. Others claim she used poison prepared by her physicians. What is certain is that Cleopatra died quietly, without spectacle, at the age of 39. When her servants found her, she was lying on a couch of gold and linen. Her expression was serene. There were no signs of struggle. Charmian, loyal to the end, adjusted her crown and whispered it was well done. Octavian entered her chambers not long after. He found the queen already gone, the last pharaoh of Egypt, who had ruled with intellect and grace. Lying in the silence she had chosen, he ordered her buried beside Antony, granting her that final wish. The world outside continued its rhythm. The Nile flowed. The markets reopened. Rome celebrated. Egypt became a province of the empire, its temples now overseen by foreign governors. But in Alexandria, among the fading light of marble courtyards and the soft hum of the river wind, a certain stillness remained. Cleopatra's life, in all its complexity, had ended not with spectacle, but with silence. She had lived through wars, alliances, betrayals, and revolutions, yet her final act was one of peace. In the centuries that followed, poets and historians would turn her into legend. Some would call her a seductress, others a strategist. But beyond the myths, the quiet truth endures. She was a ruler who sought control through calmness, who believed that intellect was stronger than force, and who faced the end with the same composure she had shown in life. Even in death, Cleopatra remained still, a queen who ruled until her very last breath, not through power or conquest, but through quiet, deliberate grace. When Cleopatra died in 30 BCE, the sound of her passing did not echo like the fall of an empire. There were no grand announcements, no triumphant horns. The world simply continued. The Nile still rose and fell. The sun still touched the white stones of Alexandria. The markets still opened with the faint chatter of merchants. Life went on as it always does, quietly indifferent to the fate of queens and conquerors. And yet, in the centuries that followed, her presence refused to fade. Cleopatra's story, though seemingly concluded, began to live again, whispered first by those who served her, then retold by Roman historians, and eventually woven into the mythology of time itself. But beneath the layers of legend and exaggeration, a quieter truth remained. She was not only a figure of passion or tragedy, but of intellect, composure, and persistence. Her legacy was not written in battles won or lost, but in endurance, in how her memory survived the empires that consumed her. In the years immediately after her death, Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian, now Augustus, ruled from afar. The Ptolemaic palaces were repurposed. Their marble floors now echoed with Latin commands instead of Greek philosophy. The great library of Alexandria, already diminished by fire and neglect, slipped further into silence. But Cleopatra's name endured in small ways at first. Her coins remained in circulation, carrying her profile, the straight nose, the calm gaze, the firm jaw. Traders handled them without much thought, exchanging them for grain or cloth, unaware that they were touching the last breath of Egypt's independence. Her temples to bore her image. Reliefs carved into stone showed her offering gifts to the gods. Standing tall in the ancient pose of the pharaohs, priests still murmured her name in ritual for a time, out of respect more than rebellion. The marble statues weathered slowly, their features fading under sun and sand, but her likeness remained, not erased, merely softened. Even the Romans, for all their victory, could not decide what to make of her. Some saw her as dangerous, a woman who had dared to challenge the might of Rome. Others admired her intelligence, her education, her mastery of language and diplomacy. They called her Regina Sapientissima, the most wise of queens. And so, even as Egypt became Rome's jewel, Cleopatra remained its soul. In later centuries, her image would change again and again, like the shifting reflection of a statue in water. To medieval scholars, she was a warning, a tale of beauty and ambition. To Renaissance poets, she was fascination itself, the exotic queen who chose death over humiliation. Artists painted her reclining on golden couches, her face serene, a small serpent at her arm. They romanticized her choice, turned her calm resolve into spectacle. But history, in its quieter form, suggests something far more human. Cleopatra's power had always been deliberate, not dramatic. Her beauty was not the kind that stunned a room. It was the kind that listened carefully, that calculated before it spoke. She ruled through intellect and patience, qualities that rarely make noise but leave deep, enduring marks. Her understanding of language, for instance, was remarkable. Unlike her Ptolemaic ancestors, who had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries without learning its native tongue, Cleopatra spoke Egyptian fluently. She also spoke Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, and perhaps several others. This was not vanity, it was strategy. To speak to a people in their own language is to govern not with distance, but with closeness. It is a quiet kind of power, the kind that does not shout but persuades. Centuries passed, the world changed, Alexandria's lighthouse fell. Rome itself turned to dust. Empires rose and fell like waves. And yet, Cleopatra remained. Her name survived translations, rewritings, reinterpretations. She was never truly forgotten. Even as scholars debated her story, they returned again and again to the same questions, not of her beauty, but of her mind. How did she manage to hold Egypt together through famine, war, and invasion? How did she balance diplomacy with empire, intellect with image? The answer, perhaps, lies in the rhythm of her life, a rhythm that was quiet, deliberate, and steady. She understood that power required patience, that control was not always force, but focus. Her life, viewed through that lens, was a study in endurance. She ruled a nation surrounded by stronger forces. She navigated alliances with the most powerful men in the world, not out of seduction, but survival. She kept Egypt's culture alive long after others would have surrendered it to assimilation, and even in death she dictated her own ending. That, in itself, is a victory. Modern historians still search for her tomb, somewhere beneath the earth near Alexandria, perhaps in a temple near the coast, perhaps beneath the waters that once surrounded the palace. Cleopatra may still rest beside Antony as she wished. The search continues quietly. Archaeologists sift through sand and stone, uncovering small fragments, amulets, carvings, coins. Each discovery raises hope, but her resting place remains elusive. Perhaps that is fitting. Cleopatra was never meant to be completely found. She existed in the space between worlds, Greek and Egyptian, ruler and scholar, history and myth. Her final mystery is part of her design, and maybe, in some quiet way, that's how she wanted it. Today, her story is told in classrooms, in films, in whispered bedtime retellings of ancient grandeur. But beyond the glitter and tragedy, the truest image of Cleopatra might not be on a throne or a battlefield. It might be in a quiet room, in the early morning light, reading scrolls by the window as the Nile flows outside. A queen thinking, planning, learning. A woman surrounded by silence, yet shaping history through thought. Her greatness was not in her conquests, but in her composure. Her legacy was not in how loudly she ruled, but in how calmly she endured. Cleopatra's immortality is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet. It lives in the steady persistence of her name, in the curiosity she continues to inspire, in the calm strength that outlasts even the empires that claim to conquer her. History often remembers kings by their wars. It remembers empires by their monuments. But Cleopatra's monument is made of something subtler: memory, fascination, endurance. Every time her story is retold, in whatever form, she breathes again, and each telling carries the same truth that her life embodied. That power can be graceful, intelligence can be gentle, and even the softest presence can shape the course of centuries. So perhaps Cleopatra did not lose. Perhaps, in choosing her silence, she won the only victory that truly lasts. To be remembered not as she was conquered, but as she lived, deliberate, intelligent, and beautifully still. And so, as the Nile continues to flow beneath the moon, Cleopatra's story comes to rest. She lived her life not through noise or conquest, but through focus and calm, a rhythm as steady as the river that sustained her kingdom. Empires have fallen since then. Palaces have crumbled. The sands have shifted 1,000 times. But her name remains quiet, unbroken, and alive in memory. Perhaps that is her greatest victory. To be remembered not as she died, but as she lived. Deliberate, intelligent, and beautifully still. Thank you for listening. And if you're still awake, perhaps you'd like to leave a like or a comment before you drift back into dreams.